April 23rd, 1943. Lisbon, Portugal. The morning mist curled off the Tagus River like cigarette smoke from 100 unseen mouths. A man in a wrinkled gray suit sat at the corner table of Café Chaveduro, his hat brim low, his fingers trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. His name was Juan Pujol García, a Spaniard by birth, a liar by profession, and a man already living 3 lives too many. Across from him sat a German intelligence officer. His uniform was immaculate, Wehrmacht gray, polished boots, the scent of leather and tobacco. He leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You are sure of these coordinates, Herr Garbo?" he asked in clipped German. Pujol nodded solemnly, sliding a folded slip of paper across the table. The coordinates pointed to a supposed convoy of Allied merchant ships, sailing from Liverpool toward Gibraltar. His voice was calm, steady, the tone of a man who believed in what he said. "It is reliable," he said, "from my agents in the Royal Navy. The British are moving tonight." The German's expression softened with satisfaction. He tapped ash from his cigarette, pocketed the slip, and stood. "Berlin will be pleased. Continue your work, Garbo. The Führer trusts you." The moment the German left, Pujol exhaled. His hand trembled as he reached for his coffee again. The man they called Garbo, for his mastery of performance, was not a Nazi at all. In truth, every word he had just spoken was a fabrication, carefully crafted to feed the Reich poison disguised as truth. Outside, Lisbon was neutral ground, a city of whispers and shadows. British agents and German spies brushed shoulders in hotel lobbies, shared taxis unknowingly, eyed each other across bars lit with yellow light. And in the middle of it all, Juan Pujol was quietly building a phantom army, dozens of imaginary agents across Britain and Europe, each with names, addresses, even handwriting. To the Germans, this invisible network was one of their greatest assets. But tonight's lie, the fake convoy, carried more than his usual risk. If the deception failed, hundreds of British sailors might die in the North Atlantic, cut down by U-boats lying in wait beneath the waves. If it succeeded, those same submarines would surface to nothing but empty water and the shriek of gulls. He watched the German disappear into the crowd outside, then quietly paid his bill. Somewhere in the shadows, a contact from MI6 would be waiting for the signal. A flick of a newspaper, a glance toward the tram stop that was all it would take to tell London that the bait has been taken. And yet, as he walked into the Lisbon fog, a sliver of unease followed him. What if, this time, his own lie worked too well? What if it led the Germans to believe something catastrophic, something that might cost lives elsewhere? That was the paradox of Garbo's war. To save lives, he had to lie. To fight evil, he had to play its most faithful servant. Above him, the faint hum of a distant plane echoed over the city. Somewhere out there, convoys were already sailing through the black Atlantic night, unaware that their fate depended not on guns or armor, but on the words of a man who belonged to no side, and who trusted no truth except the one he invented. May 2nd, 1943, North Atlantic, 200 miles west of Ireland. The sea was merciless that night, steel-gray waves rising and collapsing under a bruised sky. Beneath the surface, inside the cramped hull of U-boat U-514, the air was thick with diesel fumes and sweat. Red light bathed the control room as the captain, Kapitän-Leutnant Hans-Jürgen Offermann, studied his charts. His crew whispered around him, tired, hungry, their ears attuned to the distant hum of Allied propellers. The message had arrived from Berlin only hours earlier, intelligence from Agent Garbo, their trusted man in London. According to him, a British convoy, codenamed HX-229, was steaming southwest, unescorted, ripe for the kill. It was the perfect opportunity for the wolf pack. "Helm, course 214 degrees, Offerman ordered. The submarine tilted slightly as it adjusted direction, slicing through black water like a blade. Above, waves rolled endlessly, blind to the invisible hunters below. But there was nothing there. No convoy, no escorts, just cold emptiness, and the low moan of the sea. For 2 days, they prowled the designated coordinates. Sonar pings, periscope sweeps, all yielded silence. The crew grew restless. "The British must have changed course," one muttered, "or Garbo has been compromised." Alferman shook his head. "The Abwehr trusts him. We hold position." Miles away, another U-boat surfaced. Same orders, same result. A third reported mechanical trouble after wasting precious fuel chasing ghosts across the Atlantic. The entire formation, 6 U-boats in total, had been lured into a void. Meanwhile, in Bletchley Park, British code breakers intercepted fragments of German radio chatter. Frustration, confusion, captains demanding confirmation of Garbo's intelligence. In London, a young officer in MI6 smiled quietly at the transcript. "It worked," he whispered. "They're chasing smoke." Back in Lisbon, Garbo sat by his window, pen in hand, composing his next report to Berlin. The trick was subtlety. Never make the lie too perfect. Sometimes he would admit to being slightly wrong, or claim a delay in his informant's signals. It built credibility. It made him real. In his latest message, he explained the failure in the North Atlantic. His fictional subagent, a man who did not exist, had supposedly misread a Royal Navy communiqué. "I regret this error deeply," he wrote. "It will not happen again." The Germans forgave him. They even thanked him for his honesty. It was one of the greatest deceptions of the war, and yet not a single bullet had been fired. The U-boats returned home empty-handed, their morale shaken. Dozens of Allied ships carrying fuel, munitions, and grain sailed safely through what should have been their graveyard. But for Pujol, victory carried its own weight. Every success made his role as Garbo more convincing and more dangerous. The Germans now trusted him implicitly, sometimes more than their own officers. The lies were working too well. He stared out over the rooftops of Lisbon, thinking of his wife, of his homeland, of the strange limbo he lived in, neither ally nor enemy, saint nor sinner. He could never reveal what he truly was. To the British, he was useful. To the Germans, invaluable. To himself, he was starting to vanish beneath his own performance. The North Atlantic lay quiet again, but Pujol's war had only begun. Soon, his lies would grow bigger, not about convoys or U-boats, but about the very future of Europe itself. November 1943, London, England. Rain slid down the blacked-out windows of an MI5 safe house on Ryder Street. Inside, beneath the dim glow of a single lamp, Juan Pujol García sat surrounded by typewriters, cipher pads, and empty teacups. His voice was hoarse from dictation. Across from him, his British handler, Thomas Harris, leaned back in his chair, listening. "Let me get this straight," Harris said, raising an eyebrow. "You've now created how many agents?" Pujol smiled faintly. 27, each with a different handwriting, style of report, and salary. I have a Welsh nationalist, a dock worker in Glasgow, 2 supposed RAF officers, and a former prostitute in Brighton. Berlin believes they're all loyal to them. Harris laughed softly. "You're running an army of ghosts, Garbo." The name fit. Like the actress Greta Garbo, Pujol lived in a world of illusions, but his stage was Europe, and his audience sat in Hitler's war room. With every false report, every imaginary agent, he deepened the web of deception. From his desk, Pujol typed his next transmission to the Abwehr headquarters in Madrid. The message, transmitted via radio by MI5, would be encoded, sent across the channel, and received as gospel. Tonight's subject: Allied naval movements in preparation for an upcoming operation. A decoy, of course. He paused before typing the first line. Report from Agent 4B. Increased British naval activity in the Scottish ports, possibly a prelude to landings in Norway. In reality, there was no Agent 4B. There were no landings planned in Norway. But soon, this lie would feed into something far greater: the Allied plan to deceive the Germans about the location of the upcoming invasion of Western Europe. Pujol's work now intersected with Operation Fortitude, a massive psychological campaign designed to make the Nazis believe the D-Day landings would occur not in Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais. His fictional network would be the spine of that deception. He invented supply officers, airmen, and even entire brigades that existed only on paper. Through his reports, these units appeared to move, train, and await orders under the command of General Patton, the Allies' most aggressive general, who in truth was nowhere near them. Berlin swallowed it whole. Soon, Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes were diverted to the wrong coast. German divisions were pulled north, waiting for an invasion that would never come. When the real invasion struck Normandy in June 1944, Hitler hesitated for precious hours, believing it was a diversion exactly as Garbo's reports had predicted. But Pujol's success was not without torment. Late at night, when the streets of London were quiet and the city still smoldered from air raids, he sometimes stared at the ceiling and wondered, what if my lies one day cost lives instead of saving them? He could still hear the hum of U-boats under the Atlantic, the men who had hunted nothing but empty water because of him. Their faces haunted him, not out of guilt, but because he knew they, too, believed they were serving their country. Truth and falsehood had become twins in his mind, impossible to separate. Thomas Harris once asked him, "Do you ever worry they'll discover the truth?" Pujol smiled sadly. "No," he said. "I worry they won't, because then I will never be free of it." The web he had spun was now too vast to untangle. Every telegram, every coded phrase, every false convoy, it all fed into a single illusion, holding back the tide of war. And somewhere in Berlin, a German intelligence officer raised a glass to the name Garbo, the man they thought was their most loyal spy, the man who was, in truth, dismantling their empire one lie at a time. June 6, 1944. 03 GWR hours, somewhere in London. Rain whispered against the windows of MI5's operations room as the night hummed with electric tension. Radios crackled, teleprinters clattered, cigarette smoke curled beneath the ceiling lamps. The invasion, Operation Overlord, was underway. Allied ships were crossing the English Channel under cover of darkness, carrying thousands of soldiers toward the beaches of Normandy. Juan Pujol García sat at his desk, motionless, his fingers hovering over the cipher pad. For months, his messages had built toward this single night, a crescendo of lies. Every report he sent to the Germans in the past 6 months had been carefully crafted to prepare them for the wrong invasion. "Garbo, you ready?" asked Thomas Harris, his MI5 handler, his voice quiet but charged. Pujol nodded. His instructions were clear. Once the first landings began, he would immediately send a message to Berlin confirming the invasion, but in a way that reinforced the idea that Normandy was only a diversion, a prelude to the real attack in the Pas-de-Calais. He began typing. "My agents report Allied landings in Normandy. Situation unclear. Belief here is that this is a feint. The main blow will fall in the Calais region." The message was transmitted at dawn. Within hours, the German High Command received it. Pujol's credibility was so absolute that they relayed it directly to Adolf Hitler himself. And Hitler believed it. For the next 7 weeks, German panzer divisions, their most powerful armored units, remained near Calais, waiting for the attack that never came. Even as Allied troops fought, bled, and died on the beaches of Normandy, the Germans refused to redeploy their reserves. The myth Garbo had created held firm, stronger than any weapon or bomb. That single illusion shortened the war. It saved tens of thousands of Allied lives, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more civilians in Europe. In London, when the first confirmed reports arrived that German units were still frozen in Calais, Harris clapped his hands together. "You've done it, Juan," he said softly. "They swallowed it whole." But Garbo didn't smile. He sat in silence, staring at his hands. "They believed because they needed to," he murmured. "Everyone does, in war. We all need our illusions." As the hours passed, London erupted in cautious celebration. Radios buzzed with Churchill's speeches. Planes droned overhead toward France. Yet Pujol remained still, lost in thought. He thought of the German officer in Lisbon who had once shaken his hand with pride. He thought of the captains in their U-boats, the men in bunkers staring at maps, trusting the voice of Garbo, a voice that had never truly existed. For every life he had saved, he had betrayed someone who believed in him. That was his paradox, his punishment. That evening, when the final reports came in confirming the landings had succeeded, Harris placed a small glass of whiskey in front of him. "To Garbo," he said. Pujol raised it slowly. "No," he said quietly. "To the men who will never know why they lived." Outside, the sky over London glowed faintly red, the reflection of fires across the channel. Somewhere beyond that darkness, Allied soldiers were pushing inland, and German officers were still waiting for an army that would never arrive. The world was turning toward victory, and no one knew that it had been nudged there by a man with a typewriter, a codebook, and an imagination powerful enough to move armies. August 1944, London, England. The war was still raging in France, but for Juan Pujol García, Agent Garbo, the sound of typewriters had replaced the thunder of bombs. His double life had reached its zenith. The Germans, convinced of his loyalty, had awarded him the Iron Cross, personally approved by Hitler. The British, in quiet gratitude, had decorated him with the MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire. He was the only man in the entire war to be decorated by both sides. When the medal from Berlin arrived via his handler in Madrid, he stared at it for a long moment, the black cross edged in silver, the swastika stark against the steel. He held it in silence. "Strange," he said softly. "A man who never killed anyone has earned the same reward as those who did." Tomas Harris looked at him carefully. "You've killed more than you think, Juan, just not with bullets." The words lingered. As the months passed, Pujol's network of imaginary spies continued to send reports, weaving a tapestry of half-truths and illusions that kept the Germans guessing until the war's dying breath. He operated like a playwright whose stage was Europe, every scene a fiction, every character a ghost. But inside, the cost was becoming unbearable. One night, after another long shift at the safe house, Pujol walked alone through the bomb-scarred streets of London. The rain had turned the rubble into mirrors, and in every reflection he saw fragments of himself: the Spaniard who once ran a chicken farm, the fake Nazi, the British agent, the liar, the savior. He stopped under a flickering streetlight, feeling the cold metal of the Iron Cross in his pocket. For the first time, he wondered if peace would ever find a man who had lived by deception. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, London exploded with jubilation. Bells rang, crowds cheered, strangers embraced in the streets. But Garbo did not join them. He sat by his window, writing one final report not to Berlin, not to London, but to himself. "I fought a war without weapons," he wrote. "I deceived those who deceived the world. If truth was my enemy, perhaps lies were my only ally." After the war, he disappeared. To most, he simply ceased to exist. The Abwehr believed he had died of malaria in Angola in 1949, a fiction carefully arranged by MI6. In reality, Juan Pujol García lived quietly under a false name in Venezuela, running a small bookshop. For decades, no one knew the truth. The man who had saved convoys, armies, and nations became a ghost once more, the perfect ending for a man who had never truly lived as himself. In 1984, a British historian tracked him down. Old now, with silver hair and tired eyes, Pujol agreed to one final interview. When asked if he regretted deceiving so many, he smiled faintly. "I never lied for myself," he said. "Only so others could live." The camera caught his face in that moment, not triumphant, not proud, but calm. A man who had made peace with paradox. He had played both sides and belonged to neither. He had been a liar who served truth, a deceiver who saved lives, and a ghost who changed the course of history. The world remembered generals, admirals, and politicians, but in the silent war of shadows and whispers, victory belonged to the man who fought with nothing but words and won.